The crucifixion of Jesus Christ is one of the most significant events in human history. The story of how Jesus, the Son of God, was condemned to die on a cross is a powerful narrative that has been told and retold for over 2 millennia. But what about the figures responsible for his death? Who were the people that played a pivotal role in handing Jesus over to be crucified? What became of them after the trial? And how were they affected by the monumental events that they took part in? In today's video, we're going to dive deep into the lives of these key figures, the ones who were involved in the trial, the decision to crucify Jesus, and the aftermath of their actions. Many of them thought they were doing what was necessary for maintaining order, protecting their power, or upholding the law. However, the story behind their actions is far more complex than just a matter of politics or self-preservation. These individuals were acting within a unique and turbulent historical context, but their decisions would ultimately have profound spiritual consequences, ones that they likely never fully understood at the time. The first key figure we'll discuss is Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea who famously washed his hands in front of the crowd, declaring his innocence in Jesus' death. Pilate's involvement in Jesus' trial is infamous, and it raises the question, was he merely a puppet of the religious leaders? Or did he have more control over the situation than we realize? Pilate was known for being a pragmatic politician, but his actions during this trial suggest something deeper. We'll look into why he allowed the crucifixion to happen despite his own doubts about Jesus' guilt. Next, we have the high priests and religious leaders who played a crucial role in orchestrating Jesus' arrest and trial. These figures, including Caiaphas, the high priest at the time, were threatened by the growing influence of Jesus. They saw him as a disruptor of their religious authority and a challenge to their tightly controlled system. We'll examine how their fear and desire to protect their status led them to push for Jesus' death, despite the fact that they couldn't find any solid evidence to charge him with. What were their true motivations? And what ultimately became of them after the crucifixion? But the story doesn't end there. The crowd that was gathered during the trial played a significant role in demanding Jesus' crucifixion. Pilate offered to release one prisoner as part of a Passover tradition, but the crowd chose Barabbas, a known criminal, over Jesus. Why did the people, who had once hailed Jesus as their king, turn against him so quickly? Was it out of fear, influence from the religious leaders, or something else? The mob mentality is a fascinating element in this story, and we'll explore how such a large group of people could be so easily swayed to condemn an innocent man. As we move through this exploration of the key figures involved in Jesus' crucifixion, we'll also examine the aftermath of their decisions. How did their roles in this pivotal moment affect them, both immediately and in the long run? Did any of them feel remorse for their actions? Some of them may have believed they were acting in the best interest of their people, but in the end, they were part of a divine plan that they couldn't have possibly understood at the time. The consequences of their actions are not just historical facts, they hold deep spiritual implications. The religious leaders, Pilate, and even the crowd were all part of a divine narrative that would forever change the course of history. The death of Jesus, which seemed like a tragic and unjust event at the time, would ultimately lead to his resurrection and the salvation of mankind. And yet, the figures who were directly involved in his death didn't fully grasp the significance of what they were participating in. Before we continue with the rest of the video, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. What do you think about the individuals who played a role in Jesus' crucifixion? Do you believe they were justified in their actions? Or do you think they were wrong? Do you feel any of them showed remorse later on? Or were they simply blinded by power, fear, or political maneuvering? I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Let's get a conversation started. Your insights could really add to the discussion, and I'm eager to hear what you have to say. And if you're finding this video valuable so far, make sure to hit the like button. It helps me out a lot and allows this video to reach more people who may also find it insightful. Plus, if you want to stay up to date with more videos exploring similar topics, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty of content planned that delves into historical events, spiritual lessons, and thought-provoking discussions, and I don't want you to miss out. So, if you're ready to explore the deeper meanings behind these events and understand how the individuals involved in Jesus' crucifixion were impacted by their actions, keep watching. We'll break down each of these figures, their roles, and how they fit into the larger narrative of Jesus' sacrifice. The truth behind their decisions might surprise you. And it's a story worth telling. Let's jump into it. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ was not an isolated event. It was the result of a complex set of circumstances involving political, social, and religious tensions in Judea during the 1st century. The region was under Roman rule, and the political climate was one of unrest and oppression. The Roman Empire maintained strict control over its territories, including Judea, which was governed by a Roman-appointed prefect, Pontius Pilate. Pilate's primary responsibility was to maintain order and collect taxes, but he was also a figure who had the power to make decisions regarding life and death. His rule was marked by tension between the Roman authorities and the local Jewish population, who resented the Roman presence and the taxes they were required to pay. At the time of Jesus, Judea was a politically volatile region. The Jewish people were waiting for a Messiah, someone who would liberate them from the Roman occupation and restore their kingdom. The Jewish religious authorities, such as the Pharisees and Sadducees, were tasked with guiding the people in matters of faith and law. However, they also had to navigate the complicated relationship between their religious obligations and the political realities of living under Roman rule. This created a fraught environment in which religious tensions were exacerbated by the political oppression they faced. Jesus' teachings, however, began to challenge the status quo. He preached a message that emphasized love, forgiveness, and salvation, rather than political or military victory. His miracles and growing popularity among the people began to draw attention and even concern from the Jewish leaders. They saw in Jesus not a liberator in the traditional sense, but someone who threatened their power and influence over the people. Jesus' growing following, especially during the Passover festival in Jerusalem, was seen as a direct challenge to the authority of the religious establishment. His entry into the city was met with adulation from the crowds, who hailed him as the Messiah. This public display only heightened the tensions between Jesus and the religious leaders, who feared that Jesus' popularity could lead to an uprising or the loss of their own influence. The final turning point came when Jesus, in an act of protest, overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple, an action that directly challenged the religious authorities' control over the temple and its commercial activities. This act of defiance sealed Jesus' fate in the eyes of the religious leaders, who now saw him as a threat that needed to be removed. They conspired to arrest him, and with the help of one of his own disciples, Judas Iscariot, they were able to betray him. Judas' betrayal was a pivotal moment in the events leading to the crucifixion. Judas, motivated by his own personal reasons, agreed to hand over Jesus to the authorities in exchange for 30 pieces of silver. This act of betrayal set in motion the arrest of Jesus, his trial before the Sanhedrin, and ultimately, his condemnation to death by crucifixion. The religious leaders, who lacked the authority to execute Jesus themselves, needed the approval of the Roman authorities to carry out the death sentence. They brought Jesus before Pontius Pilate, accusing him of claiming to be the king of the Jews, a charge that could be interpreted as treason against the Roman Empire. Pilate, after questioning Jesus, found no grounds for condemning him to death. He saw Jesus as a man who had committed no crime worthy of execution. However, under pressure from the religious leaders and the crowd, Pilate ultimately relented, in an effort to appease the people and avoid a potential uprising. He sentenced Jesus to be crucified. The decision to crucify Jesus was a political one, as Pilate sought to maintain order and avoid further unrest in the region. The crucifixion of Jesus was the result of a series of events that were influenced by both religious and political forces. It was the culmination of tensions between Jesus and the religious leaders, as well as the broader political dynamics of Roman rule in Judea. While the religious leaders sought to protect their authority and maintain control over the people, Pilate's actions were driven by a desire to keep the peace and avoid further conflict. Ultimately, the crucifixion of Jesus was a tragic but necessary event in the unfolding of the Christian narrative, one that would lead to the ultimate message of hope and redemption that lies at the heart of the Christian faith. The trial of Jesus is one of the most significant and pivotal moments in Christian history, and it involved a range of key figures whose actions and decisions contributed to the eventual outcome of his crucifixion. These figures, from religious leaders to political authorities, played crucial roles in the process that led to the condemnation of Jesus. Each driven by their own motivations and political agendas. At the heart of the trial was Jesus Christ himself, the central figure in the events. Jesus, born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth, was a charismatic preacher who gained a significant following due to his teachings and miraculous acts. His message of love, forgiveness, and salvation resonated with many, but it also provoked opposition from religious authorities. Jesus' actions, such as his cleansing of the temple and claims of divinity, made him a threat to the established religious order. His growing popularity among the people was seen as a challenge to the authority of the Jewish religious leaders, who were determined to silence him. These leaders, including Caiaphas, the high priest, and other members of the Sanhedrin, conspired to arrest Jesus and bring him to trial, charging him with blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God. Caiaphas, the high priest, was one of the most prominent figures involved in the trial. As the chief religious authority in Judea, Caiaphas held significant power and influence within the Jewish community. His role in the trial was driven by his desire to preserve the religious order and maintain his own position of authority. When Jesus' popularity began to rise, Caiaphas saw him as a dangerous figure who could incite rebellion against both the Roman authorities and the established religious system. The high priest, along with other members of the Sanhedrin, orchestrated a secret arrest of Jesus, and he was brought before the council for trial. Although the Sanhedrin lacked the authority to execute Jesus, they condemned him to death on the charge of blasphemy and sent him to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, for sentencing. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, held ultimate authority over matters of life and death in the province. Pilate's involvement in the trial was essential, as the Jewish authorities could not carry out a death sentence without Roman approval. Pilate, despite finding no fault in Jesus, was reluctant to intervene in the matter. He saw no legitimate reason to condemn Jesus, but he also feared the potential for unrest during the Passover festival, a time of heightened religious and nationalist sentiment. The Jewish leaders accused Jesus of claiming to be the King of the Jews, a charge that could be interpreted as a challenge to Roman rule. Pilate, under pressure from the religious authorities and the crowd, eventually agreed to sentence Jesus to be crucified. Despite his personal belief in Jesus' innocence, his decision was influenced more by political considerations than any desire for justice, as he sought to avoid conflict and maintain order. One of the most tragic figures in the story is Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' 12 disciples, who betrayed him to the religious authorities. Judas had been a trusted follower of Jesus, but his motivations for betraying him remain a matter of speculation. Some believe that Judas may have been disillusioned with Jesus' refusal to lead a political rebellion against Roman rule, while others suggest that his actions were driven by greed or personal frustration. Whatever the reason, Judas' betrayal played a critical role in the arrest of Jesus. He led the soldiers to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus was taken into custody. Judas' role in the trial is one of deep sorrow, as he later regretted his actions and tried to return the 30 pieces of silver he had received for his betrayal. Overcome with guilt, Judas ultimately took his own life, making his role in the trial one of profound tragedy. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish council that oversaw religious matters, played a key role in the events leading to Jesus' trial. The Sanhedrin was made up of 71 members, including the high priest, and was responsible for interpreting Jewish law and overseeing religious practices. Although the Sanhedrin did not have the power to execute someone, they were able to condemn Jesus on charges of blasphemy. The council's decision to bring Jesus before Pilate for sentencing was driven by their desire to protect their own authority and eliminate what they saw as a threat to the religious system. While some members of the Sanhedrin, such as Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, may have had sympathies for Jesus, the majority of the council voted to condemn him. The crowd that gathered during Jesus' trial also played a significant role in his condemnation. Just days before his arrest, the same crowd had welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem with shouts of praise, proclaiming him as the Messiah. However, as the trial progressed, the religious leaders stirred up the crowd to demand Jesus' crucifixion. Pilate, in an attempt to appease the crowd, offered to release a prisoner as part of the Passover custom, hoping they would choose Jesus. Instead, the crowd chose Barabbas, a known criminal, to be set free. When Pilate asked what should be done with Jesus, the crowd cried out, "Crucify him." The crowd's fickleness highlights the power of mob mentality and the influence of the religious leaders in swaying public opinion. Their demand for Jesus' death played a pivotal role in Pilate's decision to carry out the execution. The trial of Jesus was a complex interplay of religious, political, and social forces, with each figure involved playing a crucial role in the outcome. From the religious leaders who sought to protect their authority, to Pilate, who struggled with his conscience and the pressure of maintaining order, the events leading to Jesus' crucifixion were shaped by a variety of motivations. The involvement of Judas and the crowd further complicated the narrative, revealing the complexity of human emotions and actions in the face of divine purpose. Ultimately, the trial of Jesus set the stage for the fulfillment of prophecy and the foundation of the Christian faith, as his death on the cross would lead to the resurrection and the salvation of humanity. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea during the time of Jesus' trial, is one of the most controversial and enigmatic figures in the biblical narrative. His role in the trial, crucifixion, and eventual fate has intrigued scholars, theologians, and historians for centuries. Pilate's actions during the trial of Jesus, and the political pressures that influenced him, have been the subject of much debate, but his ultimate fate after the events of the crucifixion remains shrouded in mystery. To understand Pilate's fate, we must first examine his actions during the trial of Jesus, the political climate of the time, and the varying accounts of his later life. Pontius Pilate was appointed as the Roman prefect of Judea by the Emperor Tiberius around AD 26. As the governor of a relatively small and volatile province in the Roman Empire, Pilate's primary responsibilities included maintaining order, collecting taxes, and overseeing the legal and judicial systems. Judea was a land under Roman occupation, with a population that was primarily Jewish and deeply invested in their religious practices. The Jewish people were awaiting the arrival of the Messiah, and tensions between the Roman authorities and the Jewish population were high. Pilate, being a Roman official, had to manage the delicate balance between the Roman Empire's control and the sensitive religious and political atmosphere in Judea. His role was thus a precarious one, as he had to keep the peace while also appeasing the local religious authorities and ensuring Roman interests were maintained. Pilate's encounter with Jesus was a culmination of tensions between the Roman Empire and the Jewish authorities. Jesus had gained significant popularity among the people due to his teachings, miracles, and claims to be the Messiah, while his message of love, forgiveness, and the coming kingdom of God resonated with many. It also alarmed the religious leaders, who viewed him as a threat to their power and authority. The high priests, including Caiaphas, accused Jesus of blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God. But under Roman law, blasphemy was not a capital offense. Therefore, they needed to bring Jesus before Pilate with charges that would justify a death sentence. The charge that the religious leaders brought before Pilate was that Jesus had claimed to be King of the Jews, a title that could be interpreted as a challenge to Roman rule. The Roman Empire was deeply protective of its authority, and any claim to kingship within its territories was seen as treason. Pilate, aware of the potential for unrest, questioned Jesus about his identity, asking him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" However, Pilate did not find Jesus guilty of any crime that warranted execution. In fact, according to the Gospel accounts, Pilate expressed his belief in Jesus' innocence and found no reason to condemn him to death. Despite this, Pilate was under immense pressure. The Jewish authorities were adamant about Jesus' crucifixion, and the crowd that had gathered in Jerusalem for the Passover festival was growing increasingly hostile. Pilate, unwilling to risk a public disturbance, attempted to pass responsibility for Jesus' fate to the people. He offered to release a prisoner as part of the Passover tradition, and presented the crowd with the choice between Jesus and Barabbas, a notorious criminal. Pilate likely hoped that the people would choose Jesus, whom he considered innocent, but the crowd, stirred by the religious leaders, demanded the release of Barabbas and called for Jesus' crucifixion. Pilate, who was caught between his personal belief in Jesus' innocence and his political duty to maintain order, ultimately succumbed to the pressure. In an act of symbolic washing of his hands, Pilate declared that he was not responsible for the blood of Jesus, stating, "I am innocent of this man's blood." It is your responsibility. Matthew chapter 27 verse 24. Pilate then authorized Jesus' crucifixion, although he remained personally convinced of his innocence. This moment has been widely interpreted as Pilate's ultimate failure to uphold justice in the face of political expediency. A decision that would forever define his legacy. The fate of Pontius Pilate after the crucifixion of Jesus is a subject of considerable historical ambiguity. The New Testament provides no further information about Pilate's life after the events surrounding Jesus' death. However, various sources, both historical and legendary, have attempted to trace Pilate's fate, offering a variety of interpretations and conclusions. In the early Christian tradition, Pilate's role in the crucifixion of Jesus was seen as a necessary act for fulfilling the divine plan of salvation. However, Christian writers were often less concerned with Pilate's personal fate and more focused on the theological implications of his actions. One of the earliest Christian texts to mention Pilate's fate is the Acts of Pilate, a work that was likely written in the 2nd century and is not considered canonical. According to this text, Pilate's guilt for condemning Jesus to death led him to become increasingly tormented. He is said to have committed suicide, unable to live with the weight of his actions. However, this account is largely considered apocryphal, as there is no substantial evidence to support this claim. In contrast, other early Christian writings, including the Gospel of Nicodemus, also known as the Acts of Pilate, provide a different narrative, suggesting that Pilate was later converted to Christianity and even became a martyr. This version of events, however, is more reflective of the theological agenda of early Christian communities seeking to absolve Pilate of his guilt and portray him as a figure who ultimately embraced the Christian faith. Some legends even suggest that Pilate was baptized by the Apostle Peter, though there is no historical evidence to support these claims. Historical records outside of Christian tradition offer differing perspectives on Pilate's later years. The Roman historian Tacitus, in his Annals, mentions Pilate briefly in the context of Jesus' execution but does not provide any details about Pilate's subsequent life. Other sources, including the Jewish historian Josephus, also mention Pilate's governorship but offer little information about his fate. One of the most well-known accounts of Pilate's fate comes from the History of the Church by Eusebius of Caesarea, a 4th century Christian historian. According to Eusebius, Pilate faced significant political troubles after the crucifixion of Jesus. His leadership in Judea had been marked by numerous incidents of cruelty and harshness, which had already made him unpopular among the Jewish people. After the events surrounding Jesus' trial, Pilate was recalled to Rome by the emperor. Eusebius claims that Pilate eventually fell into disgrace and was ordered to commit suicide by the Roman Emperor Caligula, though this account is debated by historians. In later centuries, Pilate's fate became the subject of various legends and myths. One of the most enduring stories comes from the Eastern Orthodox Church, which holds that Pilate's soul was damned for his role in condemning Jesus. According to this tradition, Pilate was sentenced to an eternity of wandering as a restless spirit, forever haunted by his guilt. This image of Pilate as a tortured soul reflects the Christian understanding of the consequences of rejecting the truth of Christ, a theme that is central to Christian theology. In conclusion, the fate of Pontius Pilate remains one of the great unresolved mysteries of ancient history. His decision to condemn Jesus to death, despite his personal belief in Jesus' innocence, left a lasting mark on his legacy. While Christian tradition offers various interpretations of his post-crucifixion life, the historical record provides little definitive evidence. Pilate's fate, whether as a figure of torment and remorse or as a martyr for the Christian faith, reflects the complexity of his character and the moral dilemma he faced during the trial of Jesus. The ambiguity surrounding his later years has contributed to his enduring presence in both historical and theological discussions, ensuring that his role in the crucifixion of Jesus continues to provoke debate and reflection to this day. Herod Antipas, a ruler of Galilee and Perea during the time of Jesus, plays a crucial yet often overlooked role in the New Testament narratives surrounding the trial and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The Gospels recount that Herod Antipas, who had previously ordered the beheading of John the Baptist, was involved in the events that led to Jesus' condemnation. His fate, however, is not as widely discussed in Christian texts as that of other figures like Pontius Pilate. To understand the ultimate fate of Herod Antipas, it is important to examine his historical background, his role in the trial of Jesus, and the accounts of his later life. Herod Antipas was the son of Herod the Great, the infamous king who ordered the massacre of the innocents in an attempt to eliminate the newborn Jesus. After Herod the Great's death, his kingdom was divided among his sons, and Herod Antipas was assigned the Tetrarchy, region, of Galilee and Perea, which were important territories in the Roman Empire. His rule, which lasted from 4 BCE to 39 CE, was marked by political and personal intrigue, as well as a delicate balancing act between Roman authorities and his Jewish subjects. Herod Antipas was not a king in the traditional sense but rather a tetrarch, a ruler who governed under the authority of the Roman Empire. The Gospels portray Herod Antipas as a weak and indecisive ruler who was easily swayed by the opinions of others. His involvement in the trial of Jesus comes at a time of great unrest in Judea. Jesus had gained a large following, and his growing influence alarmed both the Roman authorities and the Jewish leaders. The religious leaders, particularly the high priests and the Sanhedrin, saw Jesus as a threat to their authority and sought to have him executed. However, they needed to involve Pilate, the Roman governor, because only the Roman authorities could carry out a death sentence. When Jesus was brought before Pilate, Pilate initially sought to avoid condemning him. Recognizing that Jesus was from Galilee, Pilate sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, as Galilee fell under his jurisdiction. This event is briefly mentioned in the Gospel of Luke, which states that Pilate sent Jesus to Herod, who was in Jerusalem at the time. Herod was eager to see Jesus, as he had heard about his miracles and hoped to witness a sign or wonder from him. However, when Jesus refused to answer Herod's questions, the tetrarch became frustrated. According to the Gospel accounts, Herod and his soldiers mocked Jesus, dressing him in a royal robe, before sending him back to Pilate. This interaction between Jesus and Herod is one of the few mentions of Herod Antipas in the New Testament, and it illustrates his role as a minor player in the events that led to Jesus' crucifixion. While Pilate ultimately condemned Jesus, the involvement of Herod adds another layer of complexity to the political dynamics of the time. In the years following the crucifixion of Jesus, Herod Antipas' fate took a dramatic turn. His reign was marked by internal strife and tension, both within his family and with his Roman superiors. One of the most significant events in his later life was his involvement in the scandalous marriage to his brother Philip's wife, Herodias. This marriage was a source of controversy, particularly for John the Baptist, who openly condemned it as unlawful. John's public criticism of Herod's marriage angered Herodias, and ultimately, her daughter Salome danced for Herod at a banquet, leading to the beheading of John the Baptist. This event further tarnished Herod Antipas' reputation and established him as a ruler whose decisions were driven by personal vendettas and the influence of others. Herod Antipas' relationship with Rome also deteriorated over time. While he had initially been a loyal vassal of the Roman Empire, his relationship with the Emperor Tiberius was strained due to various political issues. In 39 CE, after a failed attempt to gain further power in the region and a political conspiracy involving his nephew Agrippa, Herod Antipas was summoned to Rome by the new emperor, Caligula. He was accused of plotting against the emperor and was subsequently exiled to Gaul, modern-day France, a fate that marked the end of his political career and his rule over Galilee and Perea. The historical sources about Herod Antipas' exile provide limited details, but it is clear that his downfall was a result of both his personal misdeeds and his failure to maintain favorable relations with the Roman authorities. The Jewish historian Josephus offers some insight into Herod Antipas' fate, describing his exile to the region of Vienne in southern Gaul, where he lived out the remainder of his life in obscurity. Josephus mentions that Herod's wife, Herodias, accompanied him into exile, and that he lived in relative poverty, far from the lavish palace he had once enjoyed in Galilee. Herod Antipas' downfall is emblematic of the fragility of political power during this period of Roman history. His rule was heavily influenced by both his personal ambitions and the shifting alliances with Rome. His inability to secure a stable relationship with the emperor and his controversial personal life ultimately led to his exile. This exile, far from the region he had once ruled, marked the end of his political influence and his legacy as a ruler. In Christian tradition, Herod Antipas is often remembered for his involvement in the trial of Jesus and the execution of John the Baptist. His actions, particularly his role in mocking Jesus and sending him back to Pilate, have been seen as indicative of his inability to make just decisions. The Gospels portray him as a ruler who, despite his curiosity about Jesus, was unwilling to act righteously and instead gave in to political pressures and the whims of his wife, Herodias. Herod's fate serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of selfishness, political expediency, and the failure to heed divine justice. In conclusion, the fate of Herod Antipas is a reflection of the turbulent political landscape of the time and his own personal flaws. His involvement in the events surrounding the trial of Jesus, though relatively minor, underscores the complex dynamics at play during the crucifixion. Herod's eventual downfall, marked by his exile and obscurity, highlights the precariousness of power in the ancient world and serves as a reminder of the consequences of decisions driven by personal vendettas and political ambition. Though his life and fate are not as widely discussed as those of figures like Pontius Pilate, Herod Antipas remains an important figure in the context of the New Testament and the history of the early Roman Empire. His story continues to provoke reflection on the nature of power, responsibility, and the impact of individual actions on the course of history. Caiaphas, the high priest during the time of Jesus' ministry and crucifixion, is one of the most prominent religious figures in the New Testament narratives. He is primarily remembered for his role in the trial of Jesus, where he was instrumental in orchestrating the plot to have Jesus condemned to death. His actions, driven by a desire to maintain control over Jewish religious affairs and safeguard his position of power, would ultimately lead to his downfall in the eyes of both the Jewish people and the Roman authorities. However, the fate of Caiaphas after the crucifixion is less discussed, and historical records about his life post-crucifixion remain scarce. To understand his fate, it's important to examine his background, role in the trial of Jesus, and the aftermath of the events that transpired during that fateful period. Caiaphas, whose full name was Joseph Caiaphas, was appointed high priest by the Roman governor Valerius Gratus around 18 CE. He was a member of the powerful and influential family of Annas. His father-in-law, who had also served as high priest and continued to wield considerable influence even after his own tenure. The high priest was the most important religious leader in Judaism at the time, and Caiaphas' position allowed him to wield significant political power as well. Since the high priest's authority extended over religious and ceremonial matters, as well as certain aspects of governance under Roman rule. As high priest, Caiaphas was responsible for overseeing the temple in Jerusalem and its operations, including the sacrificial system, and serving as the mediator between the Jewish people and God. His role also included representing the Jewish community before the Roman authorities. However, the socio-political climate in Judea at the time was fraught with tension. The region was under Roman occupation, and there was widespread unrest due to Roman taxation, religious tension, and the growing movement of followers of Jesus, who was seen by many as a messianic figure. Jesus' growing influence and his challenge to the established religious order posed a direct threat to the power structure Caiaphas had worked to maintain. The Gospels describe Caiaphas as being deeply involved in the plot to arrest Jesus. In the Gospel of John, Caiaphas is portrayed as one of the leading voices in the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, that convened to decide the fate of Jesus. He famously stated, "It is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." John chapter 11 verse 50. Reflecting his belief that Jesus' death was a necessary sacrifice to maintain peace and prevent a potential uprising. This pragmatic approach to Jesus' fate highlights Caiaphas' concerns about the stability of his own position and the fear that Jesus' growing following could lead to a violent uprising, which would provoke Roman retaliation. Caiaphas' role in the trial of Jesus, however, was not without its controversies. According to the Gospels, after Jesus was arrested in Gethsemane, he was taken to Caiaphas' house, where a trial was held in the middle of the night. The trial was illegal by Jewish law, as it violated several key principles, including the prohibition of trials at night and the requirement for 2 or more witnesses to testify to the same crime. Despite these irregularities, Caiaphas pressed ahead with the trial, determined to secure a conviction. The charges against Jesus were centered around accusations of blasphemy, specifically that he claimed to be the Son of God, a charge that Caiaphas considered worthy of death under Jewish law. When Jesus refused to answer his accusers, Caiaphas grew frustrated and, according to the Gospel of Matthew, tore his clothes in a dramatic display of indignation, declaring, "He has spoken blasphemy." Matthew chapter 26 verse 65. This act of tearing his clothes was a traditional Jewish gesture of mourning or outrage, underscoring the seriousness of the charge. Caiaphas then sought to have Jesus condemned to death. But because the Jewish authorities lacked the power to carry out capital punishment under Roman law, they needed the approval of the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, to execute the sentence. Caiaphas played a crucial role in bringing Jesus before Pilate. Although Pilate initially sought to release Jesus, he eventually gave in to the pressure from Caiaphas and the crowd, who demanded Jesus' crucifixion. This decision sealed Jesus' fate and led to his crucifixion, a moment that would forever change the course of history. Caiaphas' actions in condemning Jesus, though driven by a sense of duty to preserve the status quo, ultimately contributed to the events that led to the foundation of Christianity. After the crucifixion of Jesus, the fate of Caiaphas remains a subject of historical inquiry. The New Testament does not provide any details about what happened to him after the trial, and much of what is known about him comes from the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus and other historical sources. According to Josephus, Caiaphas continued to serve as high priest for a number of years following the crucifixion of Jesus. But he was eventually deposed by the Roman authorities in 36 CE. This occurred during the governorship of Pontius Pilate's successor, Vitellius, who replaced Caiaphas with another priest. The reason for his deposition is unclear, but it may have been due to political reasons, such as Caiaphas' failure to manage Jewish unrest or the shifting power dynamics in the region. In terms of his personal fate, there are no direct historical accounts that describe Caiaphas' life after his deposition as high priest. However, it is believed that Caiaphas likely lived out the remainder of his life in relative obscurity. Some traditions suggest that he may have faced a form of punishment or disgrace after his removal from office, but no concrete evidence exists to confirm this. What is certain, however, is that his actions during the trial of Jesus left a lasting legacy, both in terms of his impact on the events that led to the crucifixion and the eventual rise of Christianity. Caiaphas' name became synonymous with the rejection of Jesus and the willingness to sacrifice the innocent in the pursuit of political and religious power. In Christian tradition, Caiaphas is often depicted as a villain, a symbol of the religious establishment's resistance to the message of Jesus. His role in the trial and condemnation of Jesus has been criticized for its hypocrisy and injustice. The Gospels portray him as a man who, despite his high religious office, failed to recognize the true nature of Jesus' mission and the opportunity for redemption that he offered. In conclusion, while the ultimate fate of Caiaphas is not well documented, his legacy is firmly cemented in history as a key figure in the trial and crucifixion of Jesus. His actions, driven by political motivations and a desire to preserve his power, played a crucial role in the events that led to the death of Jesus, an event that would shape the future of Christianity. Caiaphas' story serves as a reminder of the complexities of power, the dangers of self-interest, and the moral and spiritual consequences of rejecting truth when it is presented.